Hey everyone, this is Nikachu, and today we're going to be talking about Fatal Push. We're going to talk about the meta game that we expect after Fatal Push, and how to adjust our Merfolk deck, and also we're going to talk about Metallic Mimic. These are the new cards coming out in Aether Revolt. A lot of buzz on social media and pretty much all over the place. People are very excited about Fatal Push because this is going to be a very serious card. Let's not beat around the bush. It's going to be played in a lot of decks. It's going to improve a lot of decks. It's just one black, destroy any creature with converted mana cost 2 or less. If a permanent left the battlefield, destroy any creature with converted mana cost 4 or less. And the big deal for Merfolk players is that it can kill Master of Waves. Not to mention basically everything else in our deck. Not only is there a 1 mana removal spell in the form of Lightning Bolt, but now there is going to be also a 1 mana removal spell in the form of Fatal Push. But do you know what? Where have we seen removal spells for 1 mana before? Oh wait, yeah, Path to Exile. Path to Exile has been in the format for forever. Now, of course, the upside to Path to Exile is that we're going to get a card out of it, so it's actually card disadvantage on behalf of our opponent's side. In fact, against those blue-white control matchups, we can side out some islands, expecting that their Path to Exiles are going to hit us, and then they're going to sift islands out of our deck, making our deck even more threat dense. There's not going to be that downside with Fatal Push, except for the fact that situationally it won't be able to kill anything with converted mana cost 3 or 4 because they have no permanent that left the battlefield, and that's actually going to be serious. Situationally, it's not going to work. And you know what? I understand that people are scared it's going to kill Master of Waves, but do you know what? There's a lot of things that kill Master of Waves right now in the format. Yeah, there's Collective Brutality, there's Disfigure, there's Knight of Souls Betrayal, there's Damnation, Liliana, The Last Hope. There's actually a lot of removal spells. This is going to be the first one for 1 mana, but that doesn't matter if Master of Waves comes out on turn 5 or 6, or even turn 4. All those other removal spells that I just mentioned are just as high impact as Fatal Push. They're all answers because Master of Waves isn't coming out on turn 2 or turn 3. So I don't know. What are we scared about Fatal Push for? What are we scared about? Because all it is a 1-for-1. That's all it is. It's just 1-for-1. It's like Terminate. Let's say you have there's a lot against removal heavy decks. There's a lot of matchups that go super long. And if you play Lord of Atlantis and then they just kill it with top deck Fatal Push, is it such a big deal? I actually don't think it's such a big deal. I think much worse is if they play Kolaghan's Command on our poor Lord of Atlantis, because they bring back a Tarmogoyf. I think it's more nasty when they play Collective Brutality, ditching like a land that they weren't going to use, and they take something important out of our hand, like a Dismember. So I think Fatal Push is going to be a great card, but I don't actually am particularly scared at all for the Merfolk archetype, because all it is a 1-for-1 removal spell. I think when people think about Jund and Abzan, it's not going to improve their deck so much against us. It's going to be just another removal spell. Like, for example, against Abzan, they already had a lot of answers for Master of Waves. This thing will just be another one. I don't think it is going to be that big of a deal. The thing I'm much more scared about is that it's going to create new archetypes that might make the metagame much more diverse. For example, Bug Delver has no 1 mana removal spell. In fact, they're really starving for 1-drops. Delver does want to play a lot of things very mana efficiently. They want to play like Delver Secrets, Serum Visions, Inquisition of Kozilek, and now they're going to have Fatal Push. Grixis Delver now is going to be much more mana efficient. Even though they lost Gitaxian Probe, I think they're going to perfectly fill it in with Fatal Push, and those Delver decks really want as many cheap interactive spells as possible. Maybe Blue-Black Delver will become a thing. Bug Control might become a thing because they now finally have a 1 mana removal spell. But like Grixis Control, like I wouldn't care. if they replace Terminate with Fatal Push, I don't think it would be that big of a deal. Yeah, I mean, it hurts. I'm not going to say that we can completely ignore it, because it's definitely going to kill Master of Waves, like on a pretty regular basis. Master of Waves won't be the glass cannon card that it used to be. But I mean, it never, like, there was always Path to Exile in the format. That's what I'm saying. Like, there was always a card that was an answer to everything, and we've been seeing this card since the beginning of time. So, I mean, if you want to say, like, Fatal Push is the end of the world, well, if they just printed Path to Exile for the first time right now, I'm sure everyone would come to the exact same conclusion. And, like, a good question, what is Jund going to take out for Fatal Push? I mean, you might say, oh, they're going to take out Terminate, but you know what? Terminate kills Primeval Titan. It kills Drowner of Hope. It kills World Breaker. It kills Reality Smasher. It's mostly, and there was also in there for a bunch of 4-drops, which will be killed by Fatal Push. But what I'm saying is there are some big creatures out there that it can't deal with Fatal Push, that it could only deal with Terminate, and I don't know if they'll so easily swap it out, even though that looks like the most logical thing to do. Jund will be a little bit more mana efficient, because by turn 3 they can play a 2-drop plus hold up Fatal Push, so there's that there. But I think in the grand scheme of things, it is not going to be too backbreaking. I wouldn't feel like I'm going to be super pushed out of the game, because it's only a 1-for-1 removal spell. I'm telling you, what really hurt was when Kolaghan's Command got printed, and like Snapcaster Mage, Kolaghan's Command, bring back a Snapcaster Mage, that was very hard to fight through. Like, when that chain started happening, I had no chance. But, I mean, if I knew my opponent has a bunch of Snapcaster Mages and there's just a bunch of Fatal Pushes in the graveyard, I can fight through that maybe with just a bunch of normal creatures. So, yeah, those are my thoughts on Fatal Push. It's going to be a great card. It's going to be interesting to see how effective it is. I'm sure it will be, and how many decks adopt it. But I don't think it's the end of the world for Merfolk whatsoever. It's just a 1-for-1. Like, I never felt like it was ever removal that Merfolk had trouble against. It was always just really fast decks that we couldn't interact with. Those were Merfolk's biggest problems, like having a sideboard guide for having a sideboard for Ad Nauseam, having a sideboard for Red Green Valakut and Affinity and Infect and Death Shadow and all those decks. That's what made Merfolk's life a living hell. But just removal decks is not. I don't think it's that big of a deal. So how does Merfolk adapt to the Fatal Push metagame? With everyone playing Fatal Push, a lot of people have a lot of ideas about what they should change in the deck, how we should approach the metagame. People are making predictions. I'll tell you what I'm going to do with my deck over the next few weeks. I'm going to do nothing. I think the biggest mistake people are going to do is over-adjust before anything's happened. Who's playing Fatal Push right now? Nobody! There's no Fatal Push in the metagame. We don't even know what the metagame looks like. We don't know what the metagame looks like. And for the most part, no one is going to change anything. I mean, the people who could play Fatal Push, they will. And the people who don't, like Infect or whatever, they're still going to play Infect, even though, like, Gitaxian Probe got banned. Anyone who got anything banned, they're still playing their deck if it's even remotely playable. And it's going to take a while for them to either make a new opinion about their archetype and give it up, or stick with it. But for the most part, I don't think the metagame is going to change on a whole. You know, Modern is a very expensive format. No one's just, Gitaxian Probe got banned, I'm gonna snap dump and sell my Infect deck. No, I think they're gonna stick to their deck, and I think most people are gonna stick to their deck. And we just got to see how the metagame evolves. What the Modern environment is going to look like, you know, as it changes over the month. And you could make a big mistake by making massive adjustments to the Merfolk deck right now, before anything's actually happened. I'm just gonna play my normal list exactly as you saw in the PTQ, and then over games, like over maybe like 20 to 50 games, I'm gonna think, well, I don't need this card. I'm gonna adjust by playing this card, and so on. And I'm going to adapt like that. But the problem is, if you make like big changes, like 10 card changes to the deck in advance, and it doesn't work, you don't know if it didn't work because of the 10 card changes or because of the metagame. If I play my stock list and it's not working, then I know it's because of the metagame. But if I play but if I were to make any big changes, I can't tell if I'm losing because of the changes or because the metagame changed. So I'm not going to do anything. I'm just not going to do anything drastic. So let's get on with finish it off with Metallic Mimic. Metallic Mimic is a very cool new card. It's 2 colorless. It's a 2/1 creature. When it enters the battlefield, you choose a creature type. We're going to choose Merfolk, of course. And whenever a creature comes into play under the creature type, you get a +1/+1 counter. Put a +1/+1 counter on that creature entering the battlefield. So, I mean, what it comes down to is, what is this card doing for us? Does it fix any leaks that we ever had in our deck? Does it help us with any of our challenges with the deck? Like I said, with the diverse metagame, all these different archetypes attacking us at many different angles. Does it solve problems, or does it help our game plan in any way that has never been seen before? So I'll just spew my thoughts on the thing. It's colorless. So for that matter, we could, in theory, add more colorless lands to our deck. Things like maybe anywhere between a second, third, or maybe even a fourth Cavern of Souls, because we can cast the thing off of colorless mana, and the caverns won't seem as clunky. So that's one bonus for it. I think the +1/+1 ability, like the fact that it gives our creature a +1/+1 counter, is pretty good. I think that's actually very powerful. I think if you can get that off, then I think it's a very powerful effect. On the other hand, how are we going to get it off if we need to put this guy into play first? That is problematic. If we play him first and then we play a creature, then they could just kill our creature, and they could just kill the Mimic in response, and we won't get a +1/+1 counter. And I think it's very important in our deck, and I think in most modern decks, that cards should have an effect when they enter the battlefield. They shouldn't be so situational. It's what made Harbinger of the Tide so good. That's what made Tidebinder Mage so good. It's what makes all our lords good, because it's an immediate effect when you put the card on the battlefield. But then I was thinking, okay, so what can Metallic Mimic do for us? What does the board look like as you play creatures? So Metallic Mimic starts as a 2/1 creature. What if you play Lord of Atlantis after that? So Lord of Atlantis becomes a 3/3 creature and makes Metallic Mimic a 3/2 creature. How does this help us? Well, in some way, it will sort of play around Pyroclasm, in that it will only lose one creature and not the other. And then after one creature is dead, we are still buffed by the other guy. But if we just had 2 lords in the first place, like say Lord of Atlantis, another Lord of Atlantis, they're both 3/3s, and then even if they Pyroclasm, we don't lose anything. So Mimic is sort of awkward in that department, in that it's not really playing around Pyroclasm, but if it were to happen, it's not a total loss, and we still have like 3 power in play. So I thought, like, okay, so how about Mimic Lord Rajiri? So basically everyone is a 4/4 except the Mimic is a 4/3. So if our opponent plays Anger of the Gods, we still have, the Mimic dies, but we still have a 4/4 and another 4/4 in play. I don't know. Is this better than just, say, having 3 lords, having Lord Rajiri? Because we can create this situation with Phantasmal Image. I started to realize that this is a very similar card to Phantasmal Image, in that Image gives us just more lords to protect us from Anger of the Gods and Pyroclasm, but it looks like Mimic is a worse version of Phantasmal Image, in such that it dies to Pyroclasm and it dies to Anger of the Gods while everything else lives. The only advantage I could theoretically think of is that you cannot play Phantasmal Image first and then curve into Merfolk. That's impossible because the Rejury has to be in play first, whereas you can play the Mimic first and then go into Rejury. Now, I also understand that people wanted to play the Mimic to save our Master of Waves elemental tokens. Well, if you play the Mimic first, that's probably not helping us with Devotion. And on top of that, I know it's more situational, but Phantasmal Image can also save the elemental tokens, but you have to play it after Master Wave was already in play. And of course, they're not going to... Well, I mean, if Master Waves dies, the elementals will still be 2/1 creatures, so Phantasmal Image still fills that role in that regard. So it feels like it's just a Phantasmal Image in that way, except that Phantasmal Image can also copy our opponent's cards. But the Mimic can be played in a top deck war. Phantasmal Image is terrible on an empty board, and then becomes a top deck. It's a very clunky card, whereas the Mimic will never be clunky because you can cast it off of any mana, and on an empty board, it's still going to be a 2/1 creature. So it's just going to be a different type of Phantasmal Image effect. And I guess it's going to require... I don't want to completely discount the card. It's going to take some playtesting, but I think if push comes to shove, I would end up liking Phantasmal Image more, but it would take some playtesting. And a lot of people are curious, what are we going to take out of the deck for this card? In a Phantasmal Image build, I would be looking at shaving or cutting Spreading Seas from the main deck. That's not to say that we're cutting out of the deck. We're going to move it into the sideboard. But if we were to try... I think if we were going to play a Lord-like game, where we're just going to spew a bunch of Lords on the battlefield and have these 5/5, 6/6 strength creatures, then Spreading Seas is just not going to be necessary because our creatures are going to overpower and overwhelm all our opponent's creatures against any deck, and unblockable creatures aren't going to be all that necessary. Although we will have the option of bringing in Spreading Seas against, Jund, Abzan control decks, or anyone else where we might really need that island walk. So those are my thoughts on Eldrazi Mimic, Fatal Push, and then I guess you guys can let me know how excited you are for these cards. As usual, like, share, comment, and subscribe. Thanks for, making me a daily part of your routine, and thanks to all my patrons supporting me on Patreon. This is me, Nikachu, talking about the new cards in Aether Revolt.